Hi Nat5, so we're looking at transport systems in animals, and in particular we're going to look in a little much more detail about what's really inside your blood. So your blood is how we move things around about our body, and it's very effective at that, but it's actually got lots of different parts inside it. If you spin down your blood in a centrifuge, then what you will get is three very distinct layers. Okay, and those three distinct layers are the red blood cells at the bottom, a thin layer that looks not like either of the other two in the middle, which is called the buffy coat, and then we've got plasma in the top. Now I'm assuming you've heard quite a few of these terms. In particular, plasma has been mentioned quite often recently for COVID therapeutics, so to try and use plasma from people who've just had the disease and recovered, because what they're looking for is having antibodies within the plasma that may help people who are currently struggling with it. So looking at these fractions, at the base we've got the erythrocytes, that's your red blood cells, and you know what they are. They are for carrying oxygen. They have got iron in them as a complex. It's maybe not surprising that they are heavy. Okay, so they are why your blood is red, because they are normally mixed in with all of the rest of it, and the red is the colour you see. Above that we've got this buffy coat, which we're going to talk about a little bit more detail in terms of the white blood cells that are in there. And then we've got this big chunk, which is the plasma. And that plasma is a kind of, they normally say a straw coloured liquid, okay? And it's just basically the liquid that everything else can float in. If you didn't have that liquidy part, then the cells couldn't move because they're solid. So lots of other things dissolved in it. You've got some nutrients and things that are carried around in there, like your blood sugar. There's other enzymes. There are antibodies, all sorts of things that can be carried in there. So that plasma is really important. You need your blood volume to be right, and you need to have enough of it liquid so it will carry other things. Looking at a bit more detail in your red blood cells. So red blood cells have a very, very particular shape. They are a biconcave disc shape. So what that means is that you have, if you look side on, this kind of shape, kind of dumbbell shape. Okay, so why they've done that is if you have just a sphere, just a round cell, then this edge, this surface is the only surface that's available for you to exchange things back and forward. And remember, their whole purpose is to carry oxygen. But if I take this one and I do this kind of move in the way, I get an extra kind of blip on either side of surface. So what I get is the biggest possible surface area compared to the inside volume, and that means I can get the best possible diffusion of oxygen, which is really what it's about. So this biconcave disc is to give it the best possible surface area to volume ratio. There also no nucleus in there. That was the one that we said repeatedly is a bit weird, because it doesn't actually need to do any control. Once it's in the blood and it's been made, it's just going to be pushed around by your heart, and it doesn't need to do anything. It is literally just moving stuff. It's like the back of a lorry. That bit which is packed, you don't need to do anything. That doesn't need to think, that doesn't need to do anything. It's driven somewhere by the cab. But in this case, we don't even need a cab, because we've just got liquid pushing round and taking it where it needs to go. Okay, so once these are made, nucleus is dissolved out, for some more space for hemoglobin. Okay, and they are small, which is important because we've got some tiny blood vessels, and they need to be flexible so that they can get through them as well. Okay, so this is the protein that is essential inside red blood cells. So hemoglobin is a really well characterized protein. We know a lot about it. We know exactly the shape it forms. We know how the heme groups bind into it to give the iron molecules that we need in here. We even know exactly what the sequence is between the chains that are made to make up this particular protein. And we even know things about what causes it to go wrong if you have particular problems with your hemoglobin. So something like sickle cell is created by just a one amino acid change inside a chain. So it can be quite important that everything is running perfectly. So what happens with hemoglobin is when oxygen binds to hemoglobin, hemoglobin by itself is dark blue, but when you bind with oxygen, you make a complex called oxyhemoglobin, and that is bright red. And that's why you have a different colour of blood in your veins than the blood in your artery. And you can see that just by looking at your arm and seeing there are little blue bits, little blue tubes. But as soon as you actually take the blood out of your veins, so like if you'd cut yourself and the blood has come from a vein, it will just hit the ear, which is 20% oxygen, and so it will flip to oxyhemoglobin and it will go red. So moving away from the red blood cells, looking at the white blood cells. White blood cells are your defense system. They are very complex in terms of there's many different types of them, and they do particularly different jobs. You need to know two types of white blood cells in terms of what they do. So the two that we're looking at are ones where they can engulf pathogens, that means basically swallow them and digest them, get rid of them, and ones that can produce antibodies. And these are two different kind of prongs of attack when you have anything that's foreign that has entered your bloodstream. So your first one is your engulfy one. These are phagocytes. Okay, so basically this means cell eaters. So what happens if we take a little diagram to the side here? Here is something foreign. It's looking a bit spiky, so this looks like a virus. Okay, and we have receptors that have recognized that this is actually the case, and these are generally antibodies that have been held. And you can see it kind of moving around, and if this kept going, it would eventually pinch off a little bubble, and here's your bubble. Okay, now this bubble is now inside the white blood cell, and then you have some pretty nasty enzymes which have also been kept in their own little bubble so they don't do damage to the cell. They fuse with this and break this down, so this gets smashed up, and once this is smashed up, the cell basically can just get rid of it, or it might just absorb some of it into itself and use the raw materials it's now made from destroying something else. Okay, so enclose it, get rid of it by digesting it, and then absorb it or release the products. It's a very effective way of doing things. They basically just go for anything that's not you. So our second type of white blood cell is the lymphocyte. The phagocytes are what we call non-specific. They just engulf anything. But a lymphocyte is more targeted because what it does is produce antibodies. And antibodies are proteins that have a very, very specific complementary shape to an antigen. And once you've got this antibody, it will attach to various parts of the pathogen and basically stop it working by blocking it from doing other things. And it will also signal to the phagocytes to say this is something you need to mop up. What's really impressive is the fact that you can use these as memory. So if the first time you've actually encountered a particular antigen, an antibody will be produced, but that will take a while. But then you actually have lymphocytes which keep every antibody that's actually affected by an antigen, and if you then produce that again, because you've met it again, you will produce it much, much faster. And that's exactly what a vaccine is doing. It is training your body to keep that immunological memory. It doesn't mean you don't get infected by something, it means that when it actually gets into you, your body knows how to fight it and fight it fast. And that means that you have a very mild, possibly not even noticing it at all, version of the disease. And that's us.